Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to just hold on for another moment or two while people are continuing to join. Hope everyone is enjoying the lovely weather we've been having and had a chance to get outside. Fantastic. The numbers are creeping up, so we're so glad to have everyone here. So today's webinar will focus on native plants for Arbor Day, and our presenter is the one and only Louie. He's phenomenal. This is the, let's see, sorry. So we will be recording the session, and we will be using the question and answer. If you have any questions you would like to bring up, feel free to put them in there. I will consolidate the questions if I can, so that Louie can answer as many as possible. So at this moment, I'm going to turn it over to Louie.
Well, thank you. Hi, my name is Louie, and I work here at Merrifield at the tree and shrub area. And today we're going to be celebrating Earth Day. And I thought one of the best ways to do that would be to talk about native plants. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. What I labeled this as is the wonders of natives. So the first slide right here is from the West Coast. And this is a grove of the redwood trees, real close to the Pacific Ocean over there in North California. Probably one of my main things I'm going to try to do today is how everyone see nature and see things like I do. And the way I'm going to do that is for everyone to sit down and relax, and I'm going to take you on a journey. And the journey starts with the beginning 70 million years ago. That's when the forest of North America, especially from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Mississippi River, got started. I decided to write out 70 million so you get an idea of how long of a period of time it is there. And within that period of time, things have come and things have gone, basically within this huge forest. And within that time period, animals and plants and fungus and bacteria and all that stuff started to literally become friends. They started to have very, very intimate type relationships. And that relationship is in a very much of a balance with the forest itself. When you look at every single plant in this huge, huge forest, every single one of them was genetically different, which I find amazing. One of the reasons why these plants have survived for so long and were able to adapt so well was because of having different genetic makeup. If a disease would come into the area and wipe out millions of different trees because of the disease, there was always a few of them that actually could withstand that. And in doing so, over the next million years, they would actually repopulate the forest. I find that quite amazing. They say that the American chestnut, if the population was as large as it was before the Europeans got here, that the disease that wiped them out probably would not have been able to wipe all of them out, again, because of the genetic makeup. Another thing I find very fascinating about this forest is that everything pretty much talks to everything else. Think of the forest as one thing instead of many things. If you took a cubic yard of soil out of the old growth forest and you raised it up and you were able to connect all the fungus threads that ran through that, it would have more fungus threads than the internet of today, which baffles my mind how that could be possible. But that's what they say. This is give you an idea of the idea of a forest. They say that, from the Atlantic Ocean, if a squirrel got up into a tree, it could literally go from tree to tree all the way to the Mississippi River. Sometimes, with the streams and stuff, they probably have to swim across, but other than that, it would never have to touch the ground. It was an immense forest. Albert Einstein once said, "We still do not know 1/1000% of what nature has revealed to us." We still don't understand it at all, basically. When you think of an old growth forest, as I mentioned, you think of it as one instead of as many. It's almost like the human body, and how in the human body, everything connects with everything else and everything plays off of everything else. This forest is the same way. It basically connects. It basically communicates with everything. It is in harmony. It automatically balances itself so that it basically can last a long, long time, instead of basically not being able to do that. It can withstand just about everything. It's a self-regulating type of system. So if something ever does get out of balance with that, there's mechanisms within that actually will bring it back into balance again. And one of my favorite things is moss. So you're going to see some moss today. So the definition of a native plant is one that occurs naturally in a particular region, ecosystem, or habitat without direct or indirect human intervention. So again, before the Europeans came over here, and even before the Indians were here, the American Indians, these forests literally were here for millions and millions of years. And every single plant within them was a native plant. This is the old growth forest that we have here in Fairfax County. This is a hemlock old growth forest. An invasive plant, these are plants that come from out because of us humans, is a non-native plant, introduced species that harms its new environment. Invasive species adversely affect habitat, bioregions, causing ecological, environmental, and economic damage. That definition, one of the things that stands out for me is it's a non-native plant. When you look at the forest in general, there's other plants that are involved with that balance. Let's say we have a forest fire that took out 100 square miles of forest. The plants that are actually in the hardwood forest, especially the perennials, would not do so well in this area because of the intensity of the sun. So they have other native plants that literally start, basically have crabgrass, and start to get the soil ready. And you have different stages until you get to the hardwood forest. So that each one of these stages, they introduce different species that get the soil ready for those. And we're going to talk a little about those, and I'll point some of them out along our journey today. And here is one of my favorite natives, and this is the lady slipper orchids. They are found here in the Fairfax County. I did have some where I grew up over in Oakton. They are incredible. When I talk about intimate relationships, there's only a certain type of bacteria or fungus that needs to be in the soil for these things to live. That's why it's almost virtually impossible to buy these, because of that fungus within the soil. If it's not present, then these things can't live. So that's what I mean by having these intimate type of relationships with the environment themselves. So some of the native attributes that I want to talk about today is with native plants, they're adapted to our soil, temperature, our rainfall, and our humidity. So they live here for 70 million years. They know how to live here. Um, they complement other natives and how they interact with each other, as I just mentioned to you, is extremely important for the native insects and animals and things in their area. They've been feeding on these plants for a long time. They also have a extremely complex type of recycling system. Everything in the woods gets to be recycled. Nothing ever goes to waste, which I find fascinating. And yeah, basically, I could talk all day about this type of scenarios and how these native plants have so much to be known for. So another thing that these plants do is they're homes to all the animals and to all the birds. They make a habitat for um, for all the animals and stuff that you see here. Um, what I find interesting again is if you have a very small area and a tree falls down, native plants, especially the trees and the shrubs, are able to utilize that extra sun. A lot of people think that mainly if they get too much sun that they'll just wither away. What happens is they actually adapt to it and they give what's called super blooms. When I moved into the house where I grew up over in Oakton, we had a septic field in the back of our house. And so they had to take out the forest to put this in. So on all three sides of it, and the fourth side being the house, there was woods. The first year that we were there were tons of dogwoods around the area. And they bloomed, but they didn't bloom very much because they actually set their blooms when they were in shade. Shaded does not, they don't bloom very much. Natives, are very sparse when they're in the woods. Once the sun hit them, they literally became alive. And the following year in the springtime, there was one big white cloud that basically took over the whole yard. And there were thousands and thousands and thousands of these dogwood flowers everywhere. And again, it's because they can utilize the sun, which makes an incredible amount of energy, which can produce a lot more seeds and a lot more flowers. So it is amazing. One of the side things is I did a seminar on pollinators. A lot of the native pollinators actually hibernate in the leaves, in the litter, literally on the floor of the forest. So, when you're raking those leaves up, you might want to consider to leave a little bit for the bees. And again, when you're looking at native plants, think about what their purpose is along this web which connects all the forests together. So now what I've decided to do for the rest of the seminar is to go through some of these native plants. It's not one of the more educational type things. I just want you to be at awe with what nature has to offer you. We're going to go through these very, very slowly, and I just want you to relax and to have a sense of awe as to what these native plants and what nature actually brings upon you. As I said, Einstein said that nature reveals a lot to us, and we only pick up a 1,000th of 1%. So I want to make that a little bit higher today. So let's get started. So the first plant that I decided to do is clethra. Clethra is a shrub. It basically blooms in the late spring into summer. It's probably one of the last blooming native shrubs that we have. When they are in bloom, it is amazing. And the reason why I say that is that you get a ton of different types of bees all over these flowers. These flowers almost look like bottle brushes, hundreds and hundreds of flowers on them. The bees hover over them. When you're looking at them, you basically will see a lot of the larger bees. And then if you stare at them for a little certain amount of time, the clethra reveals more pollinators, which are the very, very small ones, which literally buzz all over the place. So this plant is very dangerous when you get up close to it, when you're trying to water it. because there are so many bees. So it is highly fragrant. Fragrance is used a lot by nature to bring bees to it. A lot of the very early blooming types of flowers that you see out there in very late winter, early spring are highly fragrant. And the reason why is because they want the bees to know where they are. And the reason how they communicate that is through their fragrance, so that the bees will pick up on that and the pollinators will, so they know exactly where these plants are. So fragrance is a really big communicator within the forest. These things actually get a food source for birds as well. One time I was literally watering them. A bird came down onto the clethra, grabbed one of those pollinators and ate it. So again, the food chain, very important. Insects are towards the bottom of that. But all the food chain always starts with the native plants. So it's just an incredible plant to use in your garden. And I believe it's probably one of the best pollinators, if not the best native pollinator that I know of. Another thing about it, when you think about, pollinators, is native plants have very, very rich pollen on them. Some other plants don't. They've been adapted and changed to a certain degree to make them look more beautiful. But in essence, the pollen is what this flower is all about. The flower is there to bring the actual, bees to the flower. One thing I always remember when I'm looking at the history of the world is how there was no flowers. And then there was what we call the enlightenment of plants, in which all of a sudden, within a certain period of time, some plants actually started very slowly to go ahead and start to flower. And then all of a sudden, within a certain amount of time, you had thousands and thousands and thousands of flowers happening all at once. They call it the enlightenment of plants. And it must have been incredible when they first started out to be able to witness something as beautiful as that. This is by far one of my favorites. This is called a big leaf magnolia. It is a native plant. There are some that are planted around here. Most of them are found in the Kentucky and Tennessee area. These magnolias have the actual biggest leaf of any native plant in North America. We do sell them here at the nursery. They get about 2 to 3 feet long and about a foot wide. I did find one over when I was hiking over close to where I grew up. It is an amazing plant. They get about 30, 40 feet high. They have these beautiful magnolia flowers on them. One of the things I find neat about it is amongst the flowers, they actually don't want to pollinate themselves. So the female parts and the male parts, they occur at different times within the flower so that they can't pollinate themselves. I find amazing. Literally, this leaf is huge. They do turn yellow in the fall. When I found the one that I saw, I didn't see the actual tree itself. It was in the wintertime, and I saw these huge brown leaves on the ground. And I knew that this thing existed, in our area. And I looked around, and I did speculate that one of the trees that I was looking at had these fuzzy tips at the top of each branch. And I thought this must be it. But I had to wait until the springtime until they finally came out to realize, how what tree it was, and it basically was the tree that I thought it was. Just an incredible tree. There is a lot of these up at Old Rag along the Fire Road. When I go hiking up there, I always look for them. They're almost like an old friend to me. Now, if you take all the native plants in the North America forest and you look and see what one probably is the best for all of its attributes, that would be the white oak. The white oak basically can live 2, 3, 4, 500 years. They speculate that before man came here at all, that some of these trees would get over 1,000 years old. They are quite impressive. They do produce acorns. The acorns fall and they feed all of life, basically. They say this year that the oaks didn't produce very many acorns, and that was one of the reasons why the deer have been going to all sorts of different plants that they normally don't go after. It's because they were hungry because the oaks didn't produce, that many acorns. The other thing about them is they support a lot of caterpillars. If you take a non-native tree, you might get about maybe 3, 4, sometimes 5 different types of caterpillars that can eat them to survive. Within the red oak, it's 500 or more that actually they can support, which is quite amazing. Caterpillars are one of the bottom of the food chain type of deals. So if you don't have trees that are able to support them, then that food chain at the bottom is going to devastate a lot of things along its way. So, but they say that the white oak, which is by the far is one of the best trees. It is our national tree. And again, it's a really good tree to climb as well. So everyone loves the Virginia bluebells. I went hiking a couple weeks ago over at Bull Run, and I was just amazed at the hundreds and thousands of Virginia bluebells were out there. They are quite incredible. They are considered a spring ephemeral, and what I mean by that is they come up in the spring, they do their song and dance, they flower, they get pollinated, and then they die, and then the whole plant literally dies within a month. And then after that, they hibernate until next spring. It is quite incredible that they have such a show. We are privileged to have these type of flowers in our environment around here. If you ever get a chance to go out to Bull Run to see them, I highly recommend it. They are really incredible. There's also some spring beauties that were out there. There were some wild anemones that were blooming, and there were also some of the trout lilies that I saw when I was hiking that day. All of these literally take advantage of the sun because the leaves aren't on the tree yet. So a lot of these younger plants on the forest ground, they tend to go ahead and eat up all of that energy so that they can store it for the following year. This is a very creepy looking type of flower. It's on our wild ginger. And the interesting thing about it is most people don't even know it exists. You go out into the woods and you see this ground cover that looks like little hearts. That is called wild ginger. And wild ginger is an evergreen type of ground cover, native. And the flowers literally sit right there on the surface of the ground. And they get pollinated by ants. The inside of them is very, very sweet. So the ants, which are, attracted to that, they go in there and they slip up something or other, and then they come out and then they go to the next flower. And in doing so, they get pollinated. So again, when you're talking about these intimate type relationships, that you have ants that are actually doing the pollinating instead of bees or something like that, it's a little bit more unique. The flower themselves is just amazing. There is a pawpaw flower that occurs on the pawpaw tree. It has the same type of color. One thing that I've noticed with a lot of these plants and a lot of nature, that they repeat their forms and they repeat their colors and they repeat how they interact with things so that they literally, when you look at them, you can tell that they come from one. This is one of my favorite pairings. This is a dogwood and a redbud. Both of them bloom at the same time. The native dogwood is the Virginia state flower. It comes out with these beautiful white flowers on them. Again, when they're in the woods, they probably get about maybe, a dozen or so flowers on it. And again, it's very muted. When you take this plant and you put it into full sun, it gets thousands and thousands of flowers on it because it's taking advantage of the sun. In doing so, they flower and then they also produce berries on them in the fall to feed the birds. So this is a plant that pollinates and also a plant that feeds nature as well. One of the things I find funny about it, when we have a big grove of dogwoods here, and you go out there now, and it's quite incredible with all the flowers. In the fall, all the red leaves, or all the leaves, the green leaves turn into like this burgundy red color, and you get a ton of red berries. And that alerts all the robins. The robins love them. So they come over and they actually they eat all the berries up. And they don't just like eat one or two, they eat them so that there's hardly any left. They don't know, when they're going to get their next meal, so they really do eat a lot. Every once in a while, some of these berries actually stay on a little bit too long and they ferment. So they have a little tiny bit of alcohol in them. And I have actually seen a couple robins laying on the ground trying to fly, and I think that they got a little toasty from some of those berries, so I just find hilarious. We also have the redbud. The thing that they have in common is that both of these trees literally flower before they leaf out. So you have flowers on a stick. Once they start to leaf out, the red buds leaf out with green leaves, but they come out with a lot of other different varieties of red buds that actually produce very, very unique type looking flower or type looking leaves. And then eventually in the fall, these guys turn into yellow and then they lose their leaves. The red buds also have like this string bean type looking type of seed pod on them. And again, the thing falls to the ground. They actually send out little babies, and also they feed the animals. So sometimes I wonder if blueberries would have been better off if humans didn't like them. And the reason why is humans tend to like blueberries to eat, but they don't really see blueberries as a foundation plant or have a plant that's in your yard. I find blueberries to be an amazing looking plant. They come out in the spring with flower buds on them, and the flower buds are amazing. They look like little tiny bells, and they get pollinated. Again, they get pollinated by hundreds of bees. It's always good to cross-pollinate them because Mother Nature doesn't want you to pollinate yourself, so you can get hundreds more blueberries on a shrub if that gets cross-pollinated. Once they get pollinated, they start to form the little berries. You can see on this photograph that you have two little tiny lime green looking berries, and then as they mature, they turn into blue, and then the birds come and eat them and the humans come and eat them, and then all of a sudden there's no more berries left. But what you do get on this, which I find amazing, is you get this incredible red leaf during the fall. The leaves are just as nice, even more so than the burning bush. They basically are an intense red. The other neat thing about this shrub is they have red stems in the wintertime. So even their winter interest is really good. So, when you're looking at plants in general, you always look at them and see what they are today. When I look at a plant, I try to visualize what they will look at through all four seasons. What kind of spring do they look like? How do they look like in the summer, in the fall, and into the winter? And then the other thing I always look at, especially with trees, is how they look over time and how much more impressive they're going to be over time. So, when I talk about the native eye, I talk about stuff like that, about how to look and really see what this plant is all about. Another one is called the sourwood. Sourwood is a understory tree. It starts out in the spring with a few, it's sort of like a leathery looking type leaf on them. And then at the ends of the leaves, they start to flower. And they're highly fragrant. And the bees go berserk on this plant. Uh, they make honey out of this plant. And they sell it. They get big groves of this. They call them skeleton fingers. And the reason why is in the fall, when they turned into this incredible red, they basically have those strings of flowers on them that remind people of skeleton fingers. And they do produce seeds on that, which again, feed the birds and feed nature. I mean, all these plants have a purpose for that. It's a beautiful tree with the most intense red, and then having those are actually berries or seed pods at the very end of that. It's a very attractive tree. I love hairy plants, and this is called a Christmas cactus. You see these all over the woods. They come out in the early spring with their fiddles, which is almost like an enchanting type thing for me. I can't ever seem to get enough of this plant. They are considered an evergreen. And what I mean by that is they keep their fronds through the wintertime. If we have a good snow or something like that, they literally lie on the ground. But then in the spring, you start to get this new growth, which is what you see here. There was a customer that came in and was wondering why, not in this fern, but a different fern, why all the insects were lining up on the back of the leaf. And I told her that it wasn't insects, that basically those are the way that the ferns actually produce young. And they looked at them and they were like, "What do you mean?" I said, they send like this little powder out, and they literally, reseed themselves to a certain degree. Ferns have been around long before the flowering plants. They're ancient plants. I do have quite a collection of ferns in my house. I love ferns. Relatively easy to grow to a certain degree once you understand what they're all about. So, but they really are an amazing plant. There's a couple other ones that are in the seminar that I'm going to show you. This plant right here is a wood poppy. This grows wild in the woods. It blooms before the leaves hit, and it's considered endangered. It's on the endangered species list. So I always encourage people, when you have a plant that's endangered, is come out and get as many as you possibly can. They easily reseed themselves. They come out with their flowers, and then afterwards they get a seed pod, which is another hairy plant. And then that seed pod opens up and it kind of drops the seeds down. If the seeds land on mulch, in a lot of cases, they won't sprout because they land on bark. And with bark, they can't root into bark. And that's one of the reasons why mulch is so good for weeds, is that a lot of the weeds that are reseeded, they do very well at not being reseeded because of the bark. So when you have a plant like this, put it out in your woods where you don't have any mulch, and they will literally start to reseed themselves and they start to take over the area. Incredible plant. We have some over at one of our gardens here at Merrifield, over near the perennial house, where the bridge is, where the old sequoia is. There's a bunch of them that are already starting up, and they're starting to go ahead and take over the area to a certain degree. They also bloom around the same time as the Virginia bluebells. They complement each other very nicely. So if you do have some Virginia bluebells in your home, go ahead and toss some of these in there. I mean, with that hot color of yellow, with the cool color of blue, it just makes a very beautiful thing to look at. This is a winter thur viburnum, a bunch of a bunch of berries. Uh, so this plant literally is a native. It's a viburnum. It comes out in the early spring, and it gives you leaf, kind of a leathery leaf, and then it also gives you flowers, these white flowers. And again, as you see this pattern going on here, a lot of these native plants, they give you the pollinators that flower, that pollinate them, and then later on they feed the forest. This one literally goes in and becomes a very light whitish pink color berry, and then as that berry starts to age, it turns into that darker pink, and then eventually turns into blue. I And then the leaves at that point, when they're almost blue, turn into a very, very dark ruby red type color. Now, there is another one that's called brandywine. You have brandywine and you have winterthur. Brandywine is all the same genetic makeup, and so does the winterthur. So they can't pollinate themselves, but they can pollinate each other, and both of them will bear. It's not a male-female thing. They basically just pollinate each other. So it's a beautiful plant. I like pairing this plant with some of the Virginia cedars. Virginia cedars are evergreen, kind of a bluish color. Having these green leaves that turn into red amongst them really makes a very nice pairing, especially for a border or something like that. This is a beautiful plant. So the poplar trees. So when you look at a forest, poplar trees basically go up about 80, 90 feet, and they look like these real big columns that go up. They grow relatively fast, and they basically one of the towering plants of the hardwood forest. When I was a kid, we had, this is very young, we had a tree fall over down in the woods, and these poplars just started taking off. They got about maybe 15 feet high. We used to shimmy up them and bend them, so they almost bend to the ground, and then we would jump up. And we would jump up about 10 feet in the air. It was so fun to do that. They're very, very flexible at that point. At the tops of all these poplar trees, you have these incredible flowers. And the flowers, again, I think it's an ancient relative of the magnolia, if I look at these correctly. I love the orange on them. And they get pollinated, believe it or not. And poplars are very, very important in our forest because they grow fast and because they produce shade. And some of those really hardwood type plants can really take off underneath them until they eventually will win out overall. So this is a river birch. River birch is basically known for its bark and its loving of its moisture. That you can see them along streams and in areas that are somewhat moist. They get about 40 feet high. A lot of people put lights on them during the winter time and flash right up there because you get all sorts of different types of textures and colors on the bark of them. This native plant basically produces little tiny, I should say flowers, but they don't look like flowers. And then in the fall, they turn into an incredible yellow. Having groves of these is always a good idea. And I always pair them with the silky wood type of dogwood, which gets red stems during the wintertime. Really makes a beautiful look. This is a great plant to use in your yard. But again, I like them more in groves, and I like them more in like a multi-stem type environment instead of just a single stem, especially if you have a moist area. Another one actually that would go well with this is the Sweet Bay magnolia. That is a magnolia that gets about 30, 40 feet as well. It's a semi-evergreen. It does give you the small yellow flowers that are highly fragrant. and it would actually complement something like this very nicely. And both of them do like that same environment, that real moist environment. And I just would like to add to that is that they can adapt to some dry soil as well. Okay, so I remember the first time I was ever introduced to this. I was in those woods that I talk about over in my where I grew up. I decided to take this one path, and it's always real swampy in there. And I was like, I've never been down this path. We're gonna go ahead and take it. And when I went down there and I went around this curve, I look out in this swampy area and I see this plant, and I was just shocked. I've never seen anything like it before. This is called a floating arium, um, and it is a native to the swampy areas. We actually carried it this year. It really surprised me. Over the years, I've noticed that it's actually starting to populate this area pretty well. It started at the very top of where it flows, and now it's actually starting to root in as you go down this swampy stream area. They look like little snakes that have yellow on their heads. It is an amazing plant. Actually, I wish I could see this plant for the first time again. It was shocking to me to see it. I look forward. I mean, I have these rituals that I do every year, and one of my rituals is basically to go ahead and go out there and see this every year. It just makes me happy. This is probably one of the most important evergreens that we have in our area. This is the American holly. American holly, again, it has the flowers, they get pollinated, and then it also has the berries on it for the birds. Because that little prickly on there, a lot of birds go in there, and they basically are in there for safety. It kind of hinders them. They can go in there and not be seen. We actually raised some Luna moths one time. Luna moth is a moth that literally comes out at night. It's a native moth. It eats and eats and eats and eats. It only eats native plants. And we had to feed these things like you wouldn't believe. And I was ahead of that. I had to make sure that these things constantly get fed. They started out very small. By the end of it, they were these huge caterpillars. And then they went into their cocoon, and we waited and we waited and we waited, and all of a sudden these Luna moths started to appear. And I had the privilege of going and letting one go out in the woods, which I was amazed about. So I went down into the same woods I'm talking about. It's like my second home. And I went down there and I let it go. And I look over and I see a big buck watching me, which was incredible. And then I see this thing, and it's during the day, it's in the evening, but it's still light out. And I was really concerned because they only come out at night, first of all, because they want to mate, and secondly, because it's good for the protection. A lot of birds aren't out during that time period. And it was flying around, and my heart stopped because I thought a bird was just going to come and snatch it up. But actually, it went into the American holly. It went in, I could look in there, and it was literally tucked in there very, very cozily. And it also, you couldn't really see it because its actual wings on it camouflaged it. So it actually blended in very well with the environment around it. So I was very thankful that holly was there when I let that Luna go. This is a Jack in the Pulpit. This is a moisture plant. Again, it's just like an enchanted plant. This is a native plant around here. It grows real close to streams. It does get these really bright red berries on it. That tube thing in the middle gets tons and tons of berries on it. A wonderful plant to use in a garden, and wonderful plant to see when it's out there. Again, it looks like the enchanted forest. I mean, remember, these things have evolved over 70 million years. And some of this stuff that actually comes out of there is just totally incredible to me. This is a sugar maple at a very strange angle. It's not one of the sugar maples that you see up in New England that has the trunk and has the perfect round ball. This one actually is in the woods. It's like any other maple. It is known for its leaves, the beautiful leaves. And again, there's a lot of caterpillars that eat this thing. It does have that really sweet type of syrup, the maple syrup. So we really enjoy that, and so does all the bees. This, a lot of people are like, I wonder what that is. We have more flowers like this in our area this spring than I think of any other flower in Northern Virginia. This is a red maple flower. If you look out into the forest, when it first starts to break, when it's very, very early spring, maybe even late winter, and you see that red haze, you see thousands and thousands and thousands of these flowers. These are the red maple flowers, and they are spectacular. The bees just go after these like you wouldn't believe. They also are pollinated by air as well from the wind blowing on them. But I have seen bees on these too. From these flowers come the helicopters. Um, Here at Merrifield, we have woods on either side of us. On our west side, we have a ton of maples in there. And right about this time of the year, when there's helicopters form and there's wind, we get thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of helicopters that just invade us all over the place. And then within, a month or two, we have all these maples everywhere. Maples are extremely important to the native forest. And the reason why I say that, I call this plant or tree a tree that literally sets the tone for the hardwood forest. After you have all of the cedar, you have these as the frontier. What this tree is designed to do is designed to take up any space possible on the ground that can take it. And then it produces trees. These trees grow a lot faster than a lot of the ordinary hardwood trees. They literally come right before the hardwoods. They go up, they shade the area so that there's acorns and there's beech nuts and all those hardwoods can get started. Remember, all those hardwoods do very well in the shade, and they literally start to grow up. So this is a very, very important tree for our environment. Those helicopters are really important. And again, those helicopters are food for nature as well. This is a Cresta iris. This is a ground cover iris. It probably only gets about maybe 5 inches high. The actual leaves themselves look like flags at different angles as it goes. They are rhizomes, so they do take over an area. So you get a nice grove of these things. And then for about maybe a week to a week and a half, you get these little tiny irises on them. Wonderful native plant. This is also considered an evergreen. So during the wintertime, this plant will show off its leaves as well. This is chokeberry. Chokeberry comes out in the spring with a little bit of leaves, and then all of a sudden it bursts in with all these very, very small, very delicate flowers on them. And from those, and they're in clumps. And some of these flowers literally produce the berries on them. They come in red, and they also come in these black ones right here. We had these right next to the shrub hut one time, and I actually saw a chipmunk sitting on one of the branches, and he was eating them. And his cheeks were bigger than his body. This plant is very important for nature. One of the best things about it, though, is in the fall, this thing turns into fire. It turns in like this orangey red color. There is one that's called a low grow, or a dwarf variety that only gets about maybe 3 feet high and about 4 feet wide. They do have these in trees as well. And the trees probably get about maybe 12 feet high. They can take moisture, and they actually enjoy moisture. But again, they also can take that drought, if you will. A lot of these native plants that grow in the woods are used to and grew up years ago, the 70 million years ago, with a type of topsoil. Remember, over time, these woods accumulated tons and tons of this perfect topsoil. And what I mean by perfect topsoil, it had a little bit of clay in it. It had a lot of organic material that all those funguses and bacteria have broken down into a fine type of thing, but it's very, very airy. And in doing so, it was like a sponge and it held moisture very well. And these roots would go through there. They would never get soggy to the point where it would rot, like we have today with our solid clay, but actually it was just moist with tons of air, which is what a lot of these plants really like. So this is a plant that we can now grow in our area. This is a long needle pine. The actual needles on this thing can get a foot long. It looks like this big hairy thing. I took one to the Fairfax County Earth Day one year, and it was one of the most popular plants because it just looks so funky. One wonderful plant. This is one of those plants that up in this area and even down in North Carolina, they don't ever get any hardwoods to a certain degree. They get these pine forests, and this is one of those that is the actual part of the old type of woods. So the pine forest down there, because their soil's a little bit more different than we are up here. So wonderful plant to use. It looks like a hairy yit or something. This is another fern. This is called a cinnamon fern. And the reason why is after the fronds come out, then you get these cinnamon sticks in there. And they do look like cinnamon sticks. I had the pleasure of seeing this in the wild. This fern, just like the ostrich fern, they send out roots and they come up. So they're a runner type plant to a certain degree. And literally, they can get about 3 feet high. The fronds come out first, and then after the fronds come the reproductive parts, which are these guys right here, which are quite amazing. We saw this plant here. Great plant to use in groves or even as a specimen. It grows very, very well in our area. I always like to see them. I see these with the running New York ferns. So I never thought about using two different types of ferns in the same area. If you look to the left and the right, and you see there's leaves that are shaped by hearts, those are the wild ginger. And again, the wild ginger has that type of flower that sits on the ground, and that's what pollinates them by ants. So again, if you never look down in there, you'll never ever get to see that flower. But they complement each other very nicely. This is bark. This is bark from a black gum tree. We have a black gum on the property that's probably about maybe 60, 70 feet high. You can tell that this tree actually started growing in a woods because the trunk going up was pretty clear. At some point, the actual woods was cut down, but the tree survived or stayed there. And so all of a sudden, it started to branch out. It's probably one of my favorite trees on the property. This tree is basically like concrete. What I mean by that is the actual bark on it, the actual wood on it is very, very solid. If you ever have to get one of these removed, they are probably going to charge you 3 or 4 times as much. And the reason why is they go through a lot of chains on their chainsaw because this stuff is so solid. One of the attributes of this, and one of the things I really love about it, first of all, it berries. Secondly, the bark on it turns black when it rains. And then in the fall, this thing turns into a fire. It turns into an orange-red color. It's normally one of the first actual trees to start to change color. So when you see this tree, you know that fall, when it starts to change, that fall isn't too far away. And it's a slow growing plant. It's a slow growing tree. A lot of the hardwoods are, um, but it's definitely worth it. If you ever buy a tree like this, you're not buying it for yourself, and you're probably not even buying it for your children. You're buying it for your grandchildren and your great great grandchildren. This is one of those trees that become very very old over time, and literally when people look at it in awe when it's 150 years old, they'll probably think, well, who planted that? And you can think that your energy is probably still in there, and this is what you have for your history. These are two plants. One of them is called the woodland phlox, and the other one is called tiarella. They are woodland plants. They like to grow in the shade. Both of them are semi-evergreen. They basically complement each other perfectly. One of them is like a pinkish white, and the other one is a bluish color. The phlox themselves actually come in white as well. And they also, I think, come in pinks. Anyway, they complement each other. They actually bloom at the same time. Both of them are considered runners, meaning that instead of just becoming a big clump over time, this plant literally sends out some stems and actually root in as it goes. This is a great plant to use underneath old trees. If you go out about 3 or 4 feet from a tree when you're planting, I consider that space what I call the sacred grounds. You never want to disturb that. The reason why, there's a lot of feeder roots in there, and if you destroy those, you basically might destroy the tree. And you will not know that you destroyed the tree because it takes years and years for a tree to die, and you might not correlate what you did to that tree 10 years ago and why it's dead today. But what's good about this plant here is that it basically, you can plant it out about 4 feet, small one, and literally it will creep in towards the tree. And those roots naturally mingle with the feeder roots of the tree. And they go up into that root flare very nicely. Beautiful plant to use. These do come out when the leaves are just starting to come out on the trees. So they utilize all that energy, and they're great pollinators for the bees. This is a spaceship plant. This is called a passion plant or passion vine. You get the passion fruit from this. This is probably one of the most incredible flowers of all times. It is unbelievable how nature could produce something like this. It's amazing to me. Anyway, the lady did come in one time and she had the native passion flower, and she said it was invasive because it literally took over everything. They are not invasive because they are a native. This plant, once it is in the sun, it literally will take off for you, and it will produce a ton of different type of passion fruit, which basically feeds Mother Nature. That's what it's designed to do. I just can't get over how incredible that flower looks. There's a mayapple. Mayapples grow in groves in the woods on the forest floor. They do get the flowers at the bottom. They look like a big umbrella. They're out right now, and they're probably starting to flower. The neat thing about it is they flower, and then they get a little tiny apple on them. And they feed nature. That's what they do. And then after they feed and nature eats it up, then it goes out and it has this natural fertilizer. It gets pooped out. And again, this is also a runner. It produces plants underneath the earth that comes up. So you get these beautiful groves of plants of these Mayapples. And the reason why it's called Mayapple is that the apples are actually produced in May. So when I was a kid, we had, this is over in Maryland, we had a American beech tree that actually went up about 3 to 4 feet, and then it turned, and that trunk went parallel along the ground about 3 or 4 feet in the air, probably went about maybe 6 feet, and then it turned and went back up again. We called it the horse tree. Um, I love that tree. Basically, my father did research to find out why would something like this occur, and the surveyors used to take younger trees back in the 1800s and also, the 1900s, and they would turn them on the side to mark boundaries between different properties or an intersection of two properties. And that's what we figured out because the tree was probably at least 70, 80, 90 years old. So it was probably in the late 1800s, early 1900s that this occurred. I used to play on that tree. I used to get on top of it and I could ride it like a horse. And then we used to camp underneath it. So this is one of my favorite trees. But one of the neat things about it is what I call the root flare. Root flare are the surface roots that come off of a main trunk. When you go into a forest, you look down onto a tree, and at some point closer to the earth, it kind of starts to flare out. And where that point is, where it flares out, is called a ring, a root ring. And basically, it separates the bark on the top from the roots at the bottom. And that's where the roots started out. And the American beech tree is known as basically some of the best root flares of any tree I can imagine. If you go down to Dunbar and Oaks, they have a beautiful, beautiful American beech that has one of the best root flares I've ever seen. I've seen that tree ever since I was a kid. It is on one of the levels real close to the house. If you ever get a chance to go down there and see it, you can. Some of the old branches have fallen off, which causes the bark itself to look like eyes. So it looks like it's looking at you. This is by far one of the most patient hardwood trees in existence. Literally, it can grow very slowly in deep shade, and it will win no matter what. It slows very slowly. It grows over time. Maybe you get some more sun, still grows. And these things will be one of those trees that tower over everything else. They look like someone whitewashed and took it and made the bark all nice and white on it. It's the other neat thing I find about an American beech tree is that it basically holds its leaves through the winter time. There's speculations of why they do this. And again, it would be so nice to say, hey, Mr. Beech Tree or Mrs. Beech Tree, why is it that you hold your leaves to the wintertime? A lot of leaves get broken down during the fall, and then during the spring, if you have another leaves come down, maybe that, there's funguses and stuff need something to eat. I don't really know, but they do hold on to their leaves. They do turn brown, but they sit there. You can look through a winter forest and you can actually see all the American beech trees because they still have the leaves on them. Again, one of my favorite trees of all times. This is called a mountain laurel. They grow in this area. Over where I go hiking, I see these in full bloom. They basically, the buds on them, their cells look like little berries, but they're not berries, those are actually flower buds. If you look very carefully at the flower itself, it has two sets of stems coming at it. One is the main stem that goes up, and the other ones are actually secondary stems that actually embed themselves into the petal of the flower. And on each one of those, there's a little bit of pollen. And what happens is a bee goes in to the middle of that, and it shakes the actual flower itself. And in doing so, it loosens up the stems, and the stems spring forward and they hit the bee. And on each one of those is pollen. So that pollen hits the fur of the bee to make sure that that pollen's on there. So when it goes to another flower, it will pollinate that flower. Quite an amazing type plant. I see them all over the place here. The other neat thing about it, it is an evergreen. You start them out in shade. Once they get established, if something happens and all of a sudden, a tree falls down or something, and they basically are in full sun, these will be able to survive. They will get super blooms on them. Literally, they will get thousands of flowers on them, just like the dogwoods. Their old leaves might shrivel up because they can't handle it, but all that new growth on it, those leaves will be fine, the flowers will be fine, and they will literally take advantage of all that sunlight. Again, these bloom towards the end of May, middle or end of May, but they are quite the flower when you look at all the different parts of it. The true native one is it goes from pure white into all sorts of different types of pink. They also get very leggy at the bottom, which I love leggy plants. That's my native eye coming out of me, which gives it really neat structure. The actual branch themselves look like mahogany. They're very dark type smooth wood. Just a beautiful plant. And that gives the opportunity to take some of these native perennials to put in there and take over the area. It just gives it a lot more personality, and it benefits the woods as well because you get light more and so towards the bottom of the forest ground. This is what they look like when they're in the woods and they're wild. These are getting a lot of sun, as you can tell, because they do have a lot of flowers on them. Okay, so this is a Venus flytrap. A couple of years ago, and I did not know this, I'm a big fan of carnivorous plants that eat bugs. I have a collection of them in my house. I did not know this is a native to the United States. I thought this plant literally was down in like the tropics of, the Amazon River or the Amazon, or over in Africa, in the Congo, or over in Southeast Asia, and there's tropical rainforests where it's really, really diverse. This plant literally comes from North Carolina. It's along the coast area, maybe in a little bit, and they eat flies. They can go into a dormant state. These are not flowers. They do spike with flowers on them, but these are, I don't know what they are. I think they're probably some sort of leaf. They do have a mechanism in there that when that mechanism is hit, they literally close up so that they capture the actual insect itself, and then it basically digests it, which I always find is incredible. If you ever get one of these, make sure that you use rainwater or distilled water. They do not like to have chemicals on them. A lot of these carnivorous plants don't. Another carnivorous plant that we have in the area is the pitcher plant. Pitcher plants come up, they have a little tiny bit of water, insects go in there, they drown, and as they drown, they actually drop to the bottom, and the plant itself can digest it, which again, we're talking about Mother Nature here. I'm always just amazed on what she can do with herself. This is a yellowwood flower. A lot of people are big fans of the wisteria. Wisteria can go everywhere. It can go, 30 feet in 1 year. It can really take over an area. This tree mimics that flower. It comes in a very light pink and also comes in white. It gets about 40 feet high by about 30 feet wide. It makes a nice rounded tree when it's in full sun. The other neat thing about it is that it's fragrant, so that it does smell really good. Native plant has flowers, literally is probably one of the best pollinators around. The other incredible thing about it is that every once in a while, it gives you what I call a super bloom. And what I mean by that is you look at this tree, year after year, and you think, oh my gosh, that's just incredible with all the flowers on it. Then one year it will get like triple or quadruple the number of flowers on it. For some reason, every once in a while, it just really wants to go ahead and flower, and you get the super blooms on them. I have some of these across the street from where I live. They were planted there along the road, and I'm always amazed that every once in a while I just get shocked about how many flowers on them. They do turn into a really nice whitewashed type bark on them, which is really attractive during the wintertime. Um, and they make like the perfect tree. They're not one of those trees that is ratty looking. They do get vibrantly yellow in the fall, by the way, for their fall color. This is winterberry. Winterberry is a deciduous uh, holly. They come out, there's males and females on this plant. You do need one male to make sure all the females get pollinated. A side story on that, which is funny, I love dealing with the public. I think everyone should be able to do that for a while because you never know who you're going to bring in. There was a lady that, she just glowed when she came in. She had a big smile on her face, and her husband was around as well, and he was a great guy. And she told me that her winterberry wasn't blooming very well, was not bearing very much. And she said that she needed another male because her male is just not a stud. The male did not do what it was supposed to do. And I asked her, I said, because there's early, medium, and late blooming type of winterberry, and you have to make sure that the male and the female bloom at the same time. And she said it certainly does. And I was like, well, what about the bees? And she goes, well, I don't really see very many bees. And then I look at her and I said, you could be a bee. And she looked at me and she's like, what do you mean? I said, you can go out there with a Q-tip and go over to that male, grab some of that pollen, and then go to those female flowers and touch each one of them. And that pollen will get on there and it will produce a berry. And so she got this biggest grin on her face. And from what I understand, because I did see the pictures, she had a pollinating party. She and her her husband looked at me and goes, "Do you understand what you just did?" It was so funny. She brought in these photographs of her friends, and they were all dressed up as these funky looking bees, and they were drinking wine during the time they were supposed to get pollinated, and they went out and they pollinated all of the winterberry. And she came in and showed me the picture. She's a real wonderful family. I really like them. And she she basically had some of the best type of um, berries that she ever had. And ever since then, it's like a tradition that she does this every year. And she looks forward to it. And, so does the birds. This is a cardinal. The cardinal is the state bird here too, by the way. Um, and this plant, literally in the wintertime, you'll look out there one day and you'll see all sorts of berries on a stick. And then you come back later and you won't see one. Remember, when these birds know that these berries are ripe, they'll go after them. And winterberry for birds in the wintertime is very important. Again, in shade, you're not going to get very many berries. In full sun, you're going to get hundreds and hundreds of berries on it. This is bugbane. Bugbane is basically a perennial. These things literally get about maybe 4 feet high. They do travel. They are a shade plant. They come out with these horsetails that are unbelievable. They are, it's sort of like the bottlebrush buckeye. That's what it reminds me of. They do come in green. They also come with that really dark burgundy type. They can take a little bit of sun too, by the way. I have seen them in a little bit of sun, but they will travel. And the other neat thing about them is they're highly fragrant. So they smell really good. If you ever want to be a bee watcher, and what I mean by that is you want to relax at all, just take a lawn chair out there and sit next to this and just watch the bees go all over the place. It just takes you away from everything. This is beautyberry. The big difference between the Asian beautyberry versus the American beautyberry is the American beautyberry berries are probably 4 or 5 times bigger than the regular beautyberry from Asia. So this is a meal basically for a bird. They do come out where the stems meet the leaves with white flowers, like an off-white flowers. Again, a pollinator will come up, pollinate them, and then later on they produce food. The leaves themselves turn into a really nice yellow color. This has a type of Persithia type of look to them. But that plant is really important for the birds. This one here is called Fothergilla. It comes out with no leaves, but these little fuzzy cotton balls during the springtime. It does grow in full sun and shade. There's one that's called Blue Shadow out there, and Blue Shadow has leaves on it that are a real muted blue, and they look like someone took some milk and actually poured over them. Basically, the neat thing about this plant is the flowers on it, but also in the fall, they basically turn into fire. They turn into like this yellowy orange color, maybe a little dab of red in it. It's a wonderful deciduous plant to use in the garden because of the fall on it. Now this is a wisteria. This one is called Amethyst Falls. This is a native, so it will be tamed over time. It's not a aggressive, it's not an invasive plant. It is a native to our area. Basically, the flowers themselves are a little bit more dense and a little bit less long, almost like a ball to a certain degree, more so. Wonderful plant to use in the garden. It is a vine. You can take this and turn it into almost like a bonsai looking tree to a certain degree. And you can trim some of the branches on there to really, really make it look like it's very unique. So it's a great way to spend Earth Day. This is goldenrod. This is a field of goldenrod. There's probably thousands and millions of bees in there just going to town on it. I was up in Pennsylvania. I come from, my parents lived up in the mountains in Pennsylvania. And I was up there last year and there was goldenrod everywhere. And so I'm looking at my mom's sister, my Aunt Janet's garden, and there was some goldenrod in there. And she went in there and she plucked it out. I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, this is a weed. I'm like, no, it's not a weed. And she's like, it's everywhere. And I said, but look at it, it's beautiful. Just leave it in there. And she goes, all right, Louie. And so she makes a big joke about it now that I like weeds in my garden. So, but we do sell goldenrod here. It's very important for the bees. Remember, these plants, that perennials that bloom late, these native plants, they literally really help those bees get through the winter time. So anything that flowers late with those perennials, just leave them alone. They're not weeds. And get those bees out there because they want to store up all that honey so they can eat it through the winter time. This is what I call one of my favorite hummingbird plants. This is the shaded plant and it loves moisture, so it can take a little bit of brighter light when it is moist all the time. This thing blooms like probably in August, July and August when the hummingbirds are here. They go after this plant. This plant was made for hummingbirds. I have seen this plant along the Potomac River when I was fishing, and I actually went over to it. And hummingbirds are very aggressive. They do not like other hummingbirds. And they were fighting more so with each other than they were pollinating them. They're very protective of their flowers. But there's a big grove of them in this one area. And it looked like it was just like all red. And hummingbirds are just everywhere on it. It is a magnet for that. They do like to be a little bit in the shade. The big deal with this plant is they do like to be moist. The other thing about it is watch out with that mulch because they basically will reseed themselves relatively easily. And again, they are made, that flower, you can just look at it. It is made for hummingbirds. They really go up there and they stick that beak right down into that flower and pollinate each one of those. It makes the hummingbirds really, really, really happy. So it's more of this that you have in your garden, the better you are for those hummingbirds. This is bayberry. Bayberry is there's northern bayberry and there's southern bayberry. Both of them have very, very fragrant type leaves on them. So the deer pretty much leave them alone. They do have males and females of this plant. And basically, the females are the ones that produce this berry. They do get these very, very small flowers on it, but it's wonderful for deer resistant plant, a semi-evergreen to evergreen plant. And this is one of those that you can turn into a formal look. There's a dwarf variety. Some of the other normal ones can get 5, 6, 7 feet high. The dwarf ones get about 3 feet. But remember, the definition of a dwarf plant is not that it stays small, it just grows very slowly. But if you smush this leaf, it brings you back to the holidays. It smells really good. This is a tiger eye sumac. So remember when I mentioned about all the different phases and stages that the earth goes through in our area to go from bare ground to the hardwood forest? Sumac is one of those in the middle. It loves full sun. It's extremely drought resistant. And it literally sends out suckers and it literally can take over an area. And that's what it's designed to do. It is not an invasive plant. It basically is aggressive and it's supposed to be because it's saving the earth and getting the earth ready for that hardwood forest. This one here is called a tiger eye sumac. If you look at the top of it and you look down, these leaves right here almost look like palm tree leaves. The bottom of it can become a trunk. If you look down on it and you see that thing in the middle that's flowers and then turns to berries, that looks like an eyeball. That's why they call it a tiger eye. It's amazing. And then in the fall, this thing turns into fire. The leaves on it turn into a yellow, orange, and red. It looks like someone lit a match to it and it's burning. It's probably one of the most beautiful plants for a very, very sunny, hot, dry area. It works very well there. It does complement the Virginia red cedars very nicely. This being deciduous and the red cedars being a needle plant, and kind of on the bluish side. This is what it looks like in the fall. Again, it's just a wonderful plant to use. It is, it will sucker out, but if you have an area that literally real hot, dry, this is the plant that I would use. There's also one that's a dwarf variety. I think it's called low grow sumac. It doesn't get as big as this. Another great plant, and it does turn into fire in the fall as well. This is a Carolina jessamine. It's not jasmine, it's a jessamine. It's a semi-evergreen flower. I have seen it grow wild down in North Carolina. It's beautiful. You get thousands and thousands of flowers on it in the springtime. Anytime you use vines like this, that flower, take another plant or another vine that flowers at a different time and intermix it, like taking the native honeysuckle and pairing it with this. You have this in the spring, and then you have the honeysuckle blooming in the summertime, and then you get the bees and you get a lot of hummingbirds as well. They complement each other very nicely. This is a sumac. The sumac has the biggest girth of any native tree in what I call in the northeastern type of forest. They can get really, really big. I've actually crawled inside of one that was hollow one time. It was really funky being inside of a tree like that. I loved it. It's like like a spiritual experience for me. Sumacs, they literally like water. They can get monstrous. There's one over across from Greenbrier Shopping Center that is probably one of the biggest sumacs I've ever seen. I've actually went from tip to tip and I walked 63 steps. So when someone asks me how long or how wide a sumac gets, I'll say, wait here. I'll go 63 steps and I'll say, it's this big. I love the bark on this thing too, by the way. Echinacea. Echinacea is good for bees. It's also really good for the finches. Um, it's always important to make sure that you have that pine cone in the middle of it and don't have petals in the middle. This has all the pollen that you would ever want in a flower. The bees and the butterflies just love this plant. There's all sorts of different varieties out there in different colors. This is the pure native one here. This is the original color that it started out to be. They can take basically full sun to part sun. Perennials in general, they get to the same height every year, but they grow widthwise. So every year it gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time. This plant here is spice bush. Little tiny yellow flowers on it in the early spring. And then when the leaves come on, you smush the leaves and they smell like spices. I see these in the woods all the time. They're an understory tree-ish, shrubbish type plant, but very, very good for the environment and good for the bees. This is the trout lily. This grows on the banks of the streams. The reason why it's called a trout lily is you look at the leaves on it. It was blooming at the same time that the Virginia bluebells were blooming. This is a beautiful plant to use in your garden. They like to be a little on the moist side, by the way. This is a buckeye, a red buckeye. This is one of Michael Fay's favorite trees. It is awesome when it comes out. And they do get big over time. It's extremely underutilized. I don't know, I think everyone should have one of these in their yard. They are amazing. The way they come out, they come out of a bud and it sort of like pops with these leaves, and then at the very end of it, you get the flowers, and you also get nuts on this thing too, by the way. This is Davilia. Davilia is a very colorful plant. It grows on tops of mountains. It's one of those plants that can take real hot, baking hot sun. The flowers on it are great for pollinators. It also turns into a fiery red during the wintertime. There's all sorts of different varieties of this. And it also has these very interesting seed pods that feed the animals. And this is a monarch caterpillar on a butterfly weed. And he's munching away. He usually goes after the leaves, though. Again, it's one of those very, very intimate relationships. This caterpillar will only eat one type of leaf, and that's it. If that leaf isn't there, then the butterfly won't be there. This is Ansonia. This is a native. The neat thing about this is the fall. Look at that. It turns into like this brilliant yellow. It is a basically very hot, very large type. There are different varieties of this, but again, it's great for pollinators. And these are knees of the bald cypress. This plant actually can grow in water. There's some down in North Carolina, near the coast, that are over 2,000 years old. They're some of the oldest trees in America. One of the neat things about them is no one ever knows about them. And the reason why is they don't want all the riffraff of the public going over on them. These actual things that come out of the ground are basically their knees when they live in water like this, they basically will get their oxygen from their onto their roots. That's why they do that. This is a button bush. This can grow in swampy areas as well. I've actually seen this thing grow in water. A great pollinator plant to use in your garden, especially like in a rain garden or something like that, because it just loves the water. But it looks like a spaceship is coming there. Their seed pods on this are quite amazing too, by the way. And this is the pink muley grass. This is called a pink cloud, if you will. When I used to go down to my parents' house down in North Carolina, they had this plant, and basically it looked like a big pink cloud. Every time you use this, basically make sure that you plant them in masses. In the fall, this thing is unbelievable. And then I'm ending it with this magnificent oak tree. It's somewhere down, I believe, either in South or North Carolina. There is a name for it, and I totally right now, I can't remember what it is. The green on that, these branches are some kind of fern that grows on it. But this thing is extremely old. And it's probably, again, one of my favorite looking trees. It's very well protected. And it's probably one of the oldest trees around. So, and that is my seminar for Earth Day. I hope that everybody enjoyed it. Let me see if I can get back. I don't know if I can do that. Stop sharing.
Louis, are you ready for some questions?
Oh, okay.
Fantastic.
Go right ahead.
All right. So, someone had asked a question early on about requests for some advice on small understory trees, 12 to 14 foot, to provide screening under tree shade.
Okay, so you want some trees that get about 12 feet high, native trees that actually go well underneath the larger trees.
That's what I believe the question is.
Okay. So one of the things I really like is the viburnums. There is an arrowwood viburnum that actually grows naturally in the forest, and it does not get really that large. It gets probably anywhere from 12 feet high to a certain degree. It comes out with white flowers in the springtime, and then afterwards it does get the berries. They're like a bright blueberry. Uh, Very neat looking plant, extremely easy to grow. I think we have the two species out there, and we also have like Chicago, and another one I believe is called the Blue Muffin. Both of those are varieties of that plant. But that would be something really good to use and something like that. We also 12 feet high. I mean, if you're patient enough, you can put a rhododendron in there. Rhododendrons, the native ones, can probably get about 8 to 10 feet high to a certain degree. We also have the bottlebrush buckeye that literally could get about 12 feet high. That one does take a little bit of moisture, so you have to be careful with that one when it comes to planting underneath that type of tree. Some of those larger trees drink a lot of water. So, but you're more than welcome to come in. I can show you some of those, and I can show you a lot more. Hello?
There we go. Sorry. When is the best time of year to plant native trees and perennials?
Okay, so the best time to plant is today. So it depends on your schedule. And what I mean by that, you can basically in our area plant most of the year. If you're concerned about the summer, when you plant like in June, July, and August, and even in May to a certain degree, it's extremely important that you literally are able to water that plant consistently through the summertime. That root system is basically supporting that plant, and it has not become established. It takes about a year and a half to 2 years for that plant to get established. For the first summer, it's critical that it needs to be taken care of. It needs to get some water in there. Um, when you plant in the fall, first of all, a lot of the perennials that you're planting have already been, going into their dormant state. So when you plant that stuff, you're planting basically roots with nothing on top. A lot of people think that's very strange, to buy a plant that just looks like dirt. Um, when you plant in August, September with perennials, you probably will get some of that on top, so you will know there's a plant in there. The advantages of planting in the fall is that you don't have to get that plant through the summer. So you can water it a little less. During the wintertime, it's critical to keep those plants watered, the native ones. Make sure they stay watered. Water acts for two separate reasons. It acts as an insulator. When it gets cold, the top of the earth freezes. Underneath the earth is like 50 degrees. Heat rises. When it gets up to that icy crust, it can't get out. So it's keeping those roots nice and warm. Secondly, those plants during the wintertime are actually growing roots. So they need that moisture so they can grow the root system. So again, if you plan on taking a really long vacation in the summer, it might be a better idea to plant in the fall. Trees, ball and burlap trees and some of the bigger trees, you can plant those just about any time of the year. Basically, a lot of people like to plant those in the fall for the same apparent reason. You don't have to water as much. You basically, especially those ball and burlaps, when you water very slowly, saturate it to the point where it can't hold any more water, and then let it literally dry out to a certain degree before you water again. That's really important to get air into those roots. That those trees will literally start to send out roots all the way through the winter. So by the following summer, you basically will need to water. It just won't be as critical. And keep in mind that with all or most of the plants, they don't need a sprinkler system. They just can live on their own by the rain. I always suggest that if we do go into a severe drought, just make sure that you go out there and water them once or twice. And when you do, mimic a very slow type of soaking type rain. So really water slowly to penetrate into that root system. Okay.
Fantastic. Yeah, that reminds me, the sign over my desk says rain is not a substitute for watering. Just to put that plug in there. So another question is, are Virginia bluebells deer resistant?
They are.
That's a simple answer. I love that.
Yeah, I told you I was out at Blue Run or Bull Run, and there's tons of deer over there. And literally, I saw thousands and thousands and thousands of Virginia bluebells. So they basically were there. They do like very rich soil, and they also like to be a little on the moist side. Is to make sure you consider that. But yeah, they're definitely deer resistant.
Fantastic. And then another customer asks, first, I should say, my name's Kristen, not Sally. I apologize for not making that change at the beginning. But they have a question. They would love to get some blueberry shrubs, but they live on the edge of woodlands with lots of deer and rabbits. And there were questions, will the blueberries just get eaten to the ground? And do you have recommendations to postpone that or not make that not happen?
Okay, so you're talking about blueberries. And what was the question about blueberries? Can you just speak up just a hair, please?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, they wanted to find out if they plant them on their property that's next to woodlands, will they get eaten down by rabbits and deer? And if you have a suggestion for that to make that not happen.
Okay. So I am out in the woods all the time. I see wild blueberries everywhere. Um, If you do want to save your blueberries for yourself and not for nature, what I would suggest, one thing you can do is put up some posts around the blueberries and shield them with some kind of netting. Make sure that if you do that, make sure that basically bees can get in there so they can pollinate them, or do it right after they get pollinated. But put a physical thing in there to prevent, the deer or the rabbits from eating them. The other thing to do is to spray around them. What I would suggest, if you do that, go out from the berries and spray. There's this stuff called liquid fence. I'm a true believer in that. And you literally spray it on the ground around the plant. You do not spray the plant itself. And when the deer come up to that area, they will smell the liquid fence and they will leave. They will not try to go into that area. So that's one option you have. And then we also, as I said, we have the netting that can go over them. Birds are really the culprit. They love the blueberries. And literally, I always suggest if you do a netting or something, take a couple branches and leave them out from the netting so that the birds at least get some of them. And also remember with blueberries is they like extremely acidic soil. If your blueberries are not doing very well, it might not be this or that. It might be the pH of the soil. So always check and see how acidic they are. Remember, if they're not as acidic as they should be, then the plant itself can't absorb everything it needs to absorb. It has to be a certain type of pH for that plant to do so. All right.
Fantastic. Another question is, one, I didn't know what the cardinal flower was, and somebody helped me out with that, so I appreciate that. That was the one with the red flower with the hummingbird. And dogwood is a good understory tree. Does it do well in full sun?
Okay. So let's start out with you're talking about the cardinal flower. The cardinal flower likes the moist. When I saw it when I was on the boat, it was in really close to the Potomac River. So I assume that, and I know that they actually like to be in a very moist area. So you can basically do that. The thing about the dogwoods can take full baking hot sun. Getting in there can be a little challenging. That's just a reality. The ones that, were at my home where I grew up, for a couple of years, they were in hot baking sun. If you drive around and you look at dogwoods, a lot of those dogwoods are in basically 12 hours of sun. So yes, they can take full sun. When you plant one in full sun, you have to take care of it. You have to make sure that you give it all that it needs. Not too much water, not enough water. Once it gets established, it can take the full sun for sure.
Thank you again. I'm just going through the questions. Oh, can you suggest a few fast-growing, flowery trees that can grow without much attention in the wooded area?
So your question is some shrubs that grow in shade that flower?
Yes, trees that grow in wooded areas and flower.
Okay.
And, yeah.
I can do a whole seminar on this one. So you have to remember that when these native plants are in their natural habitat, it's normally in the woods and they do flower, but they don't flower like they would if they were in full sun. Remember, that balance is way off. When these things give a super bloom, they're basically taking advantage of all that sun and they really do like the Las Vegas, tons of flowers on them. When you see these natives in their natural habitat, they tend to be a little bit more leggy and they tend not to flower very much. So, you can go anywhere from some of the native evergreens, such as the rhododendron and the mountain laurel. Both of those wonderful woody plants, evergreen, will flower for you. and will flower in shade. Some of the plants that basically are are deciduous. One that I love is the native azaleas. Native azaleas bloom extremely well in shade, but it's more of a muted type thing. They have clumps of flowers. There's some over where I go hiking. They're about 12 feet high. When you look at them, they basically have clumps that you can see through, so that you have green, then you have these pink clouds in front of that, and they're very, very sparse, but they're very muted. They're incredibly beautiful. Another one is all the different types of viburnums, especially the arrowwood. Arrowwoods do flower in the shade, and they basically can give you some of those berries as well. Another one is Alyssum. Alyssum is a swampy plant. It is also an evergreen. It's highly deer resistant. It literally gives you these daisy looking flowers on them that come in red, and they also come in white. It's a wonderful native plant. Another flowering plant native is the Leucothiwe. Leucothiwe basically is a evergreen. During the winter time, it's an evergreen, keeps its leaves, but the leaves turn into a vibrant red. They also get white flowers on them in the spring. They like to be a little moist. The other thing about them is after they flower, they give you some incredible seeds. The Fothergilla, which you saw, it's a little cotton balls on there, very, very well in shaded area. Another one is the sweet spire. Sweet spire in the shaded area does just fine. Again, it's not going to give you a ton of flowers, but it will flower for you like it does naturally. It also sends out a little bit of suckers. Another one would be the silkywood dogwood. That's the one that gives you those nice red branches in the winter time. That one will flower, and it also will berry for you in that forest. We're talking about forest plants here. And then there's a ton of different types of perennials that would do the same thing. The winterberry flowers very well in shade and also produces the berries for you as well. There's one plant that I really didn't talk about, and that one is the oak leaf hydrangea, which is pretty deer resistant, extremely well in shade. It does give you those type of flowers that are white that turn into pink. It also gives you those oak leaf type flower or leaves on them that turn into that ruby red in the fall. And then we also have the arborescent one, which is another type of hydrangea, likes it a little moist, not deer resistant, but it does give you those big white flowers, and that does well in shade, just as long as there's a little bit of moisture to it.
Fantastic. I have two more questions. The first one, are native azaleas deer resistant? And the second,
So again, I can go back to my experience with that. Any plant is going to be, we call it resistant. We don't call it proof. This year, those deer ate a lot of different types of plants that normally they don't eat. So we never say proof. We always say resistant. I see tons and tons of native azaleas in the woods where I know deer are. So from my experience, a lot of those plants, those native azaleas are definitely deer resistant.
and I believe that the last question I had is related to the, I'm going to say it wrong, Columella mountain laurel. They want to know, will it grow in dry shade? They have lost some, unfortunately, they've lost some plants in the past.
Okay.
And one more comment. I did throughout the chat or throughout the webinar try to put the plants that you were speaking about in the chat. I will also try to get that out when we release the recording of the webinar.
Okay. So mountain laurel. So when I go out hiking, I see it on actual hills. Hills are not known for being moist. They literally, the rain comes right down. Mountain laurel is, as I said, it grows in the area. It does grow in dry shade. The point is trying to get it established. Once you get established, it will grow like you wouldn't believe. But getting there is not easy. And the reason why I say that is mountain laurel likes that type of topsoil that I explained to you. It has some, you know, clay in it, and it has a lot of broken down, um, leaves and branches and all that organic material. It's a sponge. It has a lot of air in it, and it also has a lot of nutrients in it, and it can breathe. That's what it likes. In our area now, they've taken away all that soil, and what you're left with is clay. Mountain laurel need to drink up and dry out. If they dry out too much, they die. If they don't dry out fast enough, they die. It is a very hard plant to get established. You can more than welcome to go to our plant clinic. James and Terry, Laura is in there, and so is David. They have a lot of experiences with mountain laurel and also with rhododendrons on how to make sure that they get established. One thing that they recommend is mole block. Mole block is a type of tablet that actually it's like a little rock. And they say to put some of those in there. If you put some of those in there, then the soil will actually dry out a lot quicker. Usually mountain laurel and the native mountain laurel and all the rhododendrons, if they don't dry out quick enough, then you run into a problem. I always get to a point where, if they start to wilt a little bit, then water them. But again, when you water them, they need to dry up within a certain amount of time, or they won't be able to. But once they get established, they can take, they grow in the woods. They can take a lot of drought. It's just getting them there. Good.
Oh, fantastic. Those are the questions that we have for today. And we're getting close to the 2:00 hour. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who came. If you have a last question, feel free to put it in, but we are wrapping up. Feel free to come to our stores. We have the plant clinic staffed all the times that we're open. We also have via our website a contact us, which we monitor at least daily, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, depending on the volume. And we try to answer questions through there as well. And you're always welcome to call the store because you can get directly to a department head or to anyone in a department, as well as our plant clinic. We really are here to help you be successful in the garden. I want to thank Louie for putting together such an amazing presentation. Everything was amazing and so very informative. And I see we have one last question, so I'm just going to look at that.
Hey, I just want to thank everyone for joining me today, and I hope you can see like the Earth through my eyes a little bit better. And happy Earth Day! I wish that Earth Day was every single day of the year. Maybe we'll get it to a month, like in at least a month. We need at least a month for Earth Day. So thank you all, sir, for just coming in and enjoying Earth Day with me today. I really had a lot of good time doing this seminar today. So thank you all.
Wonderful. The last question is, which store are you located? And I will say that both Louie and I work out of the Fair Oaks location at 12101 Lee Highway. We're near Fairfax County Parkway, but we have staff equally capable at all of our locations. We will do our best to get this recording up within the next 24 hours. And if you need any assistance getting the recording, feel free to email us through the Contact Us on our website, and the same people that monitor that are the people who will be able to facilitate getting the recording to you. So again, thank you everyone for attending today and have a wonderful Earth Day. Bye.